I want to talk to you about something brewing in Cleveland right now, and I'm not going to dress it up or soften it, because what I watched unfold today on the airwaves frustrated me more than I expected it to. There's a question that's been quietly circulating for weeks, and today, it finally boiled over into something louder, something almost hostile. The question sounds simple enough on its surface. Is Shedeur Sanders destined to be nothing more than a backup quarterback in this league? But strip away the casual phrasing, and you'll find something far more loaded underneath it. This isn't really a football question anymore. It's a question about who gets to control the story, who gets to decide how a young player's career is framed before he's even been given a fair runway to prove himself. And today, for the first time in a while, somebody from inside that locker room decided enough was enough and pushed back hard. Let me paint the picture for you the way it actually played out. For weeks now, Cleveland's sports talk circuit has been orbiting this quarterback battle like vultures circling something they're convinced is already dying. But this morning, the energy shifted. It wasn't the usual "who's going to win the job" conversation anymore. It turned into something sharper, something that felt almost personal. The real question being asked wasn't about performance. It was about whether this kid even deserves a roster spot if he doesn't win the starting job outright. Sit with that for a second, because it's worth sitting with. You don't spend an entire morning dissecting whether a backup is worth keeping around unless that backup scares you with how much potential he's showing. Nobody builds an entire radio segment around the fear of a non-threat. And that, whether Cleveland media wants to admit it out loud or not, is exactly what's happening with Shedeur Sanders right now. So what actually lit this fire today? It wasn't some leaked stat sheet or a viral highlight clip. It was honesty. Somebody close to the building, someone with real eyes on training camp every single day, finally said what needed to be said without hedging. And what he described wasn't a young quarterback drowning, trying to tread water in a league that's too fast for him. It was the opposite. He described faster processing, cleaner footwork in and out of the pocket, decision-making that's noticeably sharper under live pressure than it was a year ago. This isn't the kind of growth that shows up in a flashy 60-yard touchdown pass. It's the kind of growth that only people watching every single rep every single day actually notice. And he didn't hedge when he said it. He called it real, measurable improvement since the rookie season. Not wishful thinking, not projection. Something you can actually see with your own eyes if you're paying attention. And here's where it gets maddening. Even with that kind of praise sitting right there in the open, freely given by someone with no reason to inflate it, the conversation in Cleveland snapped right back to the same tired, suspicious place it always goes. Can we trust him as a backup? Is he going to be a distraction in that quarterback room? Should the locker room be nervous about how this all shakes out? I need you to really feel how absurd that pivot is. You just heard, directly from somebody inside the building, that this young man is playing better than he's ever played. And the reaction isn't excitement. It isn't curiosity. It's suspicion dressed up in a tie, doubt wearing the costume of just asking questions. Then it got heated, and I mean genuinely heated. One host on air finally asked the question that had been sitting in the room unaddressed for too long. What specifically is the problem with him being a backup this year? And the answer that came back wasn't really an answer at all. It was a dodge wrapped in nostalgia. Do you really want to relive what happened last year? But hold on, because that response falls apart the second you actually examine it. What happened last season had nothing to do with how he performed on the field. It wasn't about his effort. It wasn't about his attitude in meetings or his command of the playbook. It was about noise that came from outside the building entirely. Internet chatter. Speculation from people who've never set foot in that practice facility. None of that noise originated from anyone who actually worked alongside him every day. And this is the part that should end the debate instantly if people were being honest with themselves. Go talk to the locker room. Go ask the men who share a building with him 5-6 days a week. Defensive backs who've lined up across from him in camp speak about his work ethic with genuine respect. Young receivers who catch his passes rave about him when the cameras aren't rolling. Not a single teammate, not one coach, has come forward to say this young man was ever a problem inside that building last season. What you hear instead, over and over, on repeat, is the same description: a grinder, a professional, someone who shows up before everyone else and lets the tape speak for him instead of his mouth. So if the noise isn't coming from inside the walls of that facility, where is it actually coming from? It's coming from outside. It's coming from comment sections. It's coming from talk radio hosts who need 3 hours of controversy to fill every single day, whether the controversy is real or manufactured out of thin air. Shedeur Sanders has become a lightning rod, not because of anything he's done with a football in his hands, but because of how explosive the conversation around him gets the second his name trends online. People pick teams, strangers argue with strangers, and somehow, impossibly, all of that gets pinned on him, a 23-year-old trying to win a job instead of on the media ecosystem that profits handsomely off keeping that fire burning hot. There's a real danger in blending those two separate realities together, and that's exactly the trap Cleveland's coverage has fallen into. On one side, you've got who he actually is to the people who evaluate him every single day, the coaches charting his progress, the front office that bet draft capital on him and continues investing in his development. On the other side, you've got a completely manufactured version of him that only exists in online arguments between people who've never watched a single practice rep in person. Those two pictures don't match, and right now, the louder, more chaotic online version is dictating how the real one gets covered. Now let's get into the trade rumors, because honestly, this part borders on comedy. There's been chatter, supposedly serious chatter, about other franchises calling Cleveland to gauge interest in trading for Shedeur. I want you to understand just how flimsy this entire narrative actually is. People with real knowledge of the situation have shot it down flatly. Not one of Cleveland's quarterbacks currently holds significant trade value on the open market right now. Not the veteran, not the other rookie. And even in the unlikely event some front office somewhere floated a hypothetical conversation, why in the world would Cleveland even entertain moving a player who is actively, currently, competing for the starting job this very offseason? Could things look different in 6 weeks? Sure. 8 weeks? Absolutely. Nobody's pretending this front office has already made up its mind in stone. But that's an entirely separate conversation from the one being pushed onto the airwaves right now, which is built on pure speculation with nothing solid underneath it. This is a player who fell all the way to pick 144 just over a year ago, a fifth-round selection by draft slot alone. Cleveland made that pick. They owe it to the organization, and frankly to him, to actually develop the asset they took a chance on, instead of entertaining fantasy trade scenarios dreamed up by people who simply need content to fill airtime. And honestly, the entire backup framing misses the most obvious point sitting right in front of everyone. He already was the backup last year. It already happened. There was no incident, no controversy, no locker room blowup. He did the job quietly, supported the starter, waited his turn the way every rookie quarterback before him has had to wait his turn. So somebody explain to me, genuinely, why repeating that exact same role this season would suddenly transform into some kind of crisis. It wouldn't. It's a manufactured problem dressed up to look urgent. Let's shift gears for a moment, because not everyone on air today agreed with each other, and watching two hosts go back and forth actually exposed something important about how fractured this entire conversation has become. One host tried playing peacemaker, saying he just wants what's best for the team, and if the veteran ends up being the better quarterback in camp, then fine, start the veteran and live with the results. But here's where that logic completely falls apart, and it got called out almost immediately on air. How exactly does starting a quarterback who's shown clear, visible decline qualify as best for the team under any reasonable definition? The defense leaned on vague talk of locker room chemistry, coaching philosophy, doing things the right way. But that's a smokescreen if I've ever heard one. If the more talented player is glued to the bench because of soft concerns about vibes and seniority, that's not coaching. That's politics wearing a headset. Then came a hypothetical that exposed real hypocrisy sitting underneath this entire debate. What if Cleveland had owned the #1 overall pick this year and used it on the consensus top quarterback prospect in the class instead of taking a flyer in round 5 the year before? Would anybody seriously debate whether that rookie deserved the starting job over a clearly declining veteran? Of course not. The kid would be handed the keys without a second of hesitation. So why does the math suddenly change just because he happened to slide later into the draft? Talent doesn't care what round you went in. What shows up on tape in live competitive reps doesn't care about draft slot either. That exchange got tense fast because it forced an admission nobody on that broadcast really wanted to say out loud. This skepticism was never really about readiness. It's about where he was drafted. It's about narrative. It's about a media class that built a story in real time last season and now feels personally invested in proving that story correct, even while the evidence stacking up on the practice field is actively contradicting it day after day. One host actually pushed back on his own past stance, admitting he never agreed with how last year's quarterback situation was handled in the first place. Drafting one quarterback and then turning around days later to take Shedeur, a prospect many evaluators genuinely considered the more talented player in the class, never made sense to him from the start. I appreciated that honesty when I heard it, because it's rare to hear someone admit that on air. But then the conversation slid right back into the exact same trap. The excuse was that they didn't play him last year because he was too far behind schematically. Fine, let's grant that for a second. So now, an entire offseason later, under a brand new coaching staff running a completely overhauled system, you're telling me the guy who's been grinding through every single new install from scratch is somehow still behind a veteran who simply logged more years across different systems? That argument simply doesn't hold up under any real scrutiny. Learning a brand new offensive system from the ground up is genuinely difficult for everybody involved, including a tenured veteran with years of starting experience. Having played in other systems doesn't magically speed up installing this one. If anything, old habits and muscle memory from previous offenses can actually make the transition harder, not easier. So this, he's still catching up talking point, starts to feel less like an honest evaluation and more like a goalpost that quietly moves every single time he manages to clear it. And that, right there, is really the part that bothers me most about this entire saga. Every single report coming out of that building, every quote from the head coach, the quarterback coach, the general manager, has been consistently positive about this young man's growth. They've praised his preparation. They've praised his command of the playbook. Some have gone as far as suggesting he's performing at a level comparable to, if not better than, the veteran he's competing directly against. Instead of that becoming the dominant headline, the media keeps circling back to manufactured doubt, repeating the exact same skeptical questions as though those glowing internal reports simply don't exist. I'm not going to sit here and recite every single positive quote from camp just to hammer home a point that's already been proven repeatedly through actions and words from the people actually running this organization. At some point, you have to start asking why certain media voices keep conveniently ignoring what's sitting directly in front of them. Why does the tone flip depending entirely on which direction the wind happens to be blowing that particular week? One day, it's genuine praise. The next day, it's an accusation about popularity contests, framed as though the fans are the actual problem here instead of simply reacting to what they're watching with their own eyes. And speaking of the fans, that particular argument actually has real merit buried underneath all the noise surrounding it. Start the rookie first. If he struggles, you can always pivot back to the veteran later with far less backlash, because at minimum, you gave the young guy a legitimate shot to prove himself. Start the veteran instead, and the moment things start sliding sideways, which given recent performance trends feels less like a hypothetical and more like an inevitability waiting to happen, you'll be forced into a quarterback change anyway. Except now you've burned valuable weeks of development time, maybe burned a chunk of fan trust, and the fan base ends up furious in a way that's far harder to walk back than if you'd just given the kid the keys from week one. That's not an emotional argument. That's strategic sequencing, plain and simple. Of course, right on cue, the counter-argument shows up. He hasn't technically earned the job yet through a formal evaluation. We don't make personnel decisions based on crowd noise and popularity. I respect that sentiment in theory, I really do. No franchise should be making roster decisions purely off chance from the upper deck, but let's be honest about the reality on the ground too. If the incumbent starter throws one early interception and that stadium starts chanting for the backup by the second quarter, that's not some far-fetched hypothetical scenario anymore. That's close to a guarantee given how fans already reacted to limited backup snaps last season. They booed the starter and chanted for the backup over a single relief appearance. Now imagine that same energy amplified when the more talented, more anticipated option is sitting on the bench the entire time watching it unfold. People keep talking about this player like he was some afterthought pick that nobody actually believed in. That's revisionist history, and frankly, it's lazy. Before the draft, a significant portion of evaluators league-wide genuinely considered him a legitimate first-round caliber talent. The fact that he slid as far as he did remains one of the strangest, most debated storylines in recent draft memory, and plenty of people around the league still don't fully buy any of the official explanations offered for why it happened. So when the current conversation frames him as some long shot somehow overperforming modest expectations just by competing for a starting job, that's a fundamentally dishonest framing of the situation. He's not overperforming anything. He's finally being evaluated based on actual talent instead of draft night narrative. Some genuinely frustrated fans go a step further, suspecting there was a coordinated effort during the pre-draft process to push this player down boards, manufacturing concerns that never actually matched what scouts privately believed about his ability. I'm not going to sit here and claim that's provable, because it isn't, not with anything concrete. But I understand exactly why people feel that way watching all of this play out in real time. Even the more neutral voices in this debate will admit there's genuine uncertainty here. Saying there's zero chance he wins the starting job outright is foolish. Pretending the outcome is already guaranteed in his favor is equally foolish. Most of this entire discourse, on both extreme ends of the spectrum, is running purely on vibes and tribal allegiance rather than actual evidence sitting on game tape. What really gets under my skin is the bigger picture surrounding this single quarterback competition. This is a franchise with a well-documented, well-earned history of organizational dysfunction at the ownership level. A front office that's genuinely made real progress in recent years, but still carries the weight of years of questionable, sometimes baffling decisions. A coaching carousel that would make even the most patient fan base dizzy trying to keep track of it. And if, after watching the tape, after hearing consistently glowing reports from every single corner of that building, this organization still chooses to start a quarterback who's shown clear decline over a young talent who's earned every ounce of the praise being heaped on him, that wouldn't just be a questionable football decision. That would be the latest chapter in a long, exhausting history of this exact franchise getting in its own way. Let's talk about the veteran for a moment too, because skipping past that part entirely would feel dishonest on my end. There's a real substantive argument circulating right now that this player simply isn't capable of performing at a high level anymore. I don't say that as an insult. It's an honest read of recent tape and recent production trends. If that assessment turns out to be accurate, and a growing number of people around the league genuinely believe it is, then starting him isn't actually the safe, conservative choice it's being framed as. It's actively working against your own roster's best competitive interests. It's choosing the appearance of stability over actual performance, and in a league this ruthlessly competitive, that kind of decision tends to get punished quickly and publicly. There was even a brief tangent today about helmet-mounted cameras now being used in camp, letting players review specific snaps with coaching staff almost immediately after the play happens. One commentator dismissed the whole technology as gimmicky nonsense. Honestly, that take alone tells you how disconnected some of this criticism has become from how the modern game is actually evolving. Immediate film review, breaking down a read within minutes instead of waiting hours for the full tape session later that night, genuinely accelerates a young quarterback's development curve. Dismissing that as a gimmick isn't sharp analysis. It's someone revealing they don't fully understand what the position actually demands at this level. And that disconnect keeps showing up over and over throughout this entire debate. People who've never lined up under center, never had to process a disguised blitz package in half a second with 80,000 people screaming, confidently telling everyone exactly what a quarterback competition is supposed to look like from the outside. Meanwhile, the people who actually understand the position intimately, the coaches grading every single rep on film, the quarterback coach walking through every read with him personally, the general manager who staked real draft capital and real organizational credibility on this player, keep saying essentially the same thing on repeat. He's grown. He's ready. He's earning every bit of this opportunity. So here's where I land on all of this, and I want to be completely honest about how frustrating it's been watching this play out from the outside looking in. Every single signal coming from inside that building points toward a young quarterback who has genuinely put in the work, made a real and measurable leap, and deserves a fair, honest opportunity to win this job outright on merit. And yet the public conversation keeps getting hijacked over and over by recycled narratives, fabricated trade speculation, and a stubborn refusal from certain corners of the media to update their take even when the evidence directly in front of them keeps contradicting it. It's genuinely exhausting watching talented young players get buried under storylines that have absolutely nothing to do with how they're actually performing on the field. I'll be honest with you, this entire saga makes me wonder just how transparent this organization is even willing to be going forward, given how distorted the public narrative around their own quarterback room has already become. Maybe that distortion is part of why access has started to feel noticeably tighter lately than it used to. But either way, here's what I know for absolute certain. This competition is real. It's being earned in real time, rep by rep, on an actual practice field, and no amount of recycled narrative, no amount of fabricated trade rumors floated by people chasing engagement, no amount of media hosts flip-flopping their stance based on whatever generates the most clicks that particular week changes what's actually happening right in front of everyone watching closely enough to notice it. A young quarterback is growing, visibly, undeniably, in real time. And sooner or later, results on that field are going to speak far louder than any radio segment ever could.